The winter of 1868 came hard to the Dragoon Mountains, harder than any man could remember. Ice crystals hung from the Joshua trees like broken glass, and the wind cut through the canyon passes with the fury of 1,000 Apache war cries. It was in this frozen hell that Silas Kane found himself riding patrol, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air, his mare's hooves crunching through the thin crust of snow that covered the desert floor. At 22, Silas was already old in the ways that mattered. The war had aged him, not the one between the states, but the quieter, uglier war being waged here in the territories between settlers and the Apache. He'd hired on as a scout for the cavalry 6 months prior, not out of any particular loyalty to the uniform, but because a man needed to eat, and the army paid regular. The patrol had been tracking a band of Apache raiders for 3 days, following them through the maze of canyons and arroyos that carved up this harsh country. Yesterday, they'd caught up with them near Skeleton Canyon. The memory of it sat heavy in Silas's gut, the crack of Springfield rifles, the screams of women and children, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with blood and fear. He'd hung back during the worst of it, claiming his horse had thrown a shoe. Lieutenant Morrison had given him a hard look but said nothing. Now, riding alone through the aftermath, Silas couldn't shake the images from his mind. He'd seen Apache raids on white settlements, had helped bury the dead and comfort the survivors. But this was different. This was slaughter wearing the uniform of justice. The sun was failing when his mare suddenly shied, nearly throwing him from the saddle. Silas cursed, pulling hard on the reins. When he heard it, a sound so faint it might have been the wind, but wasn't. A whimper, barely human, coming from a cluster of rocks 20 yards to his left. He dismounted slowly, one hand on the colt at his hip. The Apache were known for their tricks, their ambushes. But as he approached the rocks, what he found wasn't a warrior lying in wait. It was a child. She couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 winters, though it was hard to tell through the dirt and blood. Her doe-skin dress was torn, and a gash ran along her left leg, the blood already frozen in dark ribbons. Her eyes, when they fluttered open at his approach, were the color of desert sage after rain, green-gray and wild with terror. Silas froze. She was Apache, no doubt about it. The geometric patterns on what remained of her dress, the way her black hair was worn, even the particular shade of her sun-darkened skin. By rights, he should signal the patrol. Morrison would want to question her, find out where the survivors had fled. By rights. But Silas had never been much good at doing what was right by other men's standards. The girl tried to scramble away, but her injured leg buckled. She fell hard, a cry escaping her lips before she bit down on them, trying to be brave. Silas held up his hands, palms out, the universal sign of peace. He didn't know if she'd understand, but he tried anyway. "Easy now," he said, keeping his voice low and calm, the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. "I ain't gonna hurt you." She watched him with those sage-green eyes, her small body coiled tight as a spring. Silas reached into his saddlebag, slow and careful, and pulled out a piece of hardtack. He took a bite himself, then held it out to her. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind howled through the rocks, carrying the distant sound of the patrol moving further away. Then, quick as a desert fox, she snatched the hardtack from his hand and retreated again, gnawing at it with desperate hunger. Silas made a decision then that would haunt him, or save him. Depending on how a man looked at it, he couldn't leave her here to die, couldn't take her to Morrison either. That left only one option, and it was a dangerous one. His small ranch lay 3 miles south, little more than a cabin, a well, and a barn he'd built with his own hands. He'd bought the land cheap from a widow whose husband had caught an Apache arrow 2 summers back. It was isolated, which suited Silas fine. More importantly, the patrol wouldn't think to look for him there. They'd assume he'd rejoin them at Fort Buchanan. "Can you ride?" he asked, pointing to his mare. The girl didn't answer, probably didn't speak English, but when he approached her again, she didn't run. He moved slow, telegraphing every movement, and finally managed to lift her. She weighed next to nothing, like a bird with hollow bones. He set her on the saddle as gentle as he could, then swung up behind her. She sat rigid as oak, but she didn't fight him. As they rode south through the gathering darkness, Silas wondered what in hell he thought he was doing. Harboring an Apache, even a child, was enough to get a man hanged in these parts. But every time he looked down at her small form, he saw something else. He saw his sister Mary, the way she'd looked after the Comanche raid when he was 15. He saw every child, red or white, caught in the grinding wheels of a war they didn't start and couldn't understand. The barn was cold but dry. Silas lit a kerosene lamp and made a bed of straw in the back corner, hidden behind bales of hay. The girl watched him work, those green-gray eyes following his every move. "Stay here," he said, knowing she probably didn't understand. "I'll get food, water." He brought blankets from the house, a pot of beans he'd cooked that morning, still warm from the stove, a canteen of water and clean cloth for her wound. She fell on the food like a starved wolf, and Silas had to gently slow her down so she wouldn't make herself sick. The gash on her leg was bad, but not fatal. He cleaned it best he could while she gritted her teeth, making no sound even though it must have hurt fierce. Apache tough, even their children. When he was done, he pointed to himself. "Silas," he said, then pointed to her, raising his eyebrows in question. She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered something that sounded like, "Nah, Leah." At least, that's how his ears caught it. "Nah, Leah," he repeated, and she almost smiled. Almost. For 3 days. Silas maintained the dangerous charade. He joined the patrol briefly to report his lame horse, then begged off duty to tend to it. Morrison was suspicious but had bigger concerns. The Apache band had vanished like smoke, and pressure from the territorial governor was mounting. Each night, Silas brought food and water to the barn. He taught Naalia a few words of English. Water, food, stay hidden. She was a quick study, her intelligence shining through despite their language barrier. On the second night, she touched his hand when he handed her the water canteen, just for a moment, but it was trust, and trust was everything. But on the third night, everything changed. Silas returned from town to find fresh horse tracks near his property. Military horses shod in the cavalry style. His blood went cold. He ran to the barn, expecting the worst, but found Naalia huddled in her corner, eyes wide with fear. "Soldiers," she said in heavily accented English, one of the new words he'd taught her. They would be back. Morrison wasn't stupid. He'd have men checking every ranch, every possible hiding spot. Silas had to get her out, and fast. He saddled his mare in the dark, wrapped Naalia in a heavy blanket. There was a narrow canyon pass 10 miles east that led into Apache territory. If he could get her that far, she might have a chance to find her people. They rode through the night, Silas picking his way by starlight and memory. Leah sat in front of him, small and trusting, and he wondered again at the strangeness of it all. A week ago, he might have collected a bounty for an Apache scalp. Now here he was, risking his neck to save one. The canyon mouth appeared just as dawn was breaking, painting the rocks in shades of rose and gold. Silas lifted Naalia down, handed her the blanket and what food he had left. She stood there, looking up at him with those remarkable eyes. "Go," he said gently, pointing toward the canyon. "Your people, go find them." She took a step, then turned back. For a moment, he thought she might speak, might say something in her broken English. Instead, she reached up and touched his face. Just once, her small hand warm against his stubbled cheek. Then she was gone, disappearing into the canyon shadows like a ghost. Silas sat his horse for a long time, watching the empty canyon mouth. Somewhere behind him, he could hear the drum of hoofbeats, the patrol, closing in. He'd have some explaining to do, but he'd think of something. He always did. As he turned his mare toward home, Silas Kane didn't know that he'd just changed the course of 2 lives forever. He didn't know that the girl he'd saved would grow into a woman of fierce beauty and fiercer determination. He didn't know that 15 years hence, Their paths would cross again in ways that would shake the very foundations of Redemption Creek. All he knew, riding back through the cold morning light, was that for once in his life, he'd chosen mercy over duty, and somehow, that small act of kindness had eased something dark and heavy in his soul. If only for a moment, the wind picked up, erasing the tracks leading to the canyon. By the time the patrol arrived at his ranch, there was no sign that anyone had been there at all. Just Silas Kane, saddling his horse for another day's work, his secret buried as deep as Apache gold in the mountains. The years had not been kind to Redemption Creek, though they'd been profitable. What started as a water stop for cattle drives had grown into a proper town, with a main street wide enough for 2 freight wagons to pass, a bank that had only been robbed twice, and enough saloons to keep the cowboys poor and the proprietors rich. The railroad was coming. They said progress was coming. But for Silas Kane, watching from the doorway of his blacksmith shop, progress looked a lot like decay dressed in Sunday clothes. At 37, Silas had settled into the rhythms of solitude. His hands, once quick with a gun, now knew the weight of a hammer better than a Colt. The forge was his church, the anvil his altar. The townspeople brought him their broken things, wagon wheels, horseshoes, plowshares, and he made them whole again. It was honest work, and it kept him too tired most nights to dream. But he did dream. Always the same, sage green eyes in a child's face, a small hand warm against his cheek, and the echo of footsteps disappearing into a canyon he'd never found again. Though he'd looked, Lord, how he'd looked in those first years after. "Mornin', Silas." Sam Aldridge, who ran the general store, stopped by the shop entrance. "You hear the news?" Silas didn't look up from the horseshoe he was shaping. "Railroad finally coming through?" "No, something else, something strange." Sam lowered his voice, though the street was near empty in the midday heat. "Apache, whole band of them. Camp not 10 miles from here. But that ain't the strange part." The hammer paused mid-swing. Silas forced himself to bring it down steady, sending sparks cascading onto the dirt floor. "Apache ain't strange in Apache country. Sam, these ain't ordinary Apache. They're being led by a woman. Leastways, that's what Johnny Reb says. And he's seen them with his own eyes while out checking his trap lines." Johnny Reb sees a lot of things that ain't there, especially after he's been at the whiskey. Maybe so, but others have seen her too. Rides a black horse. They say, face painted for war. The Mexicans down at the Flores Ranch are calling her La Guerrera, the warrior woman. Sam shifted nervously. "Mayor Hutchins called a town meeting for tonight. Wants to organize a militia. Strike first before they attack." Silas plunged the horseshoe into the water barrel, steam hissing up between them. "Apache don't attack without reason. Don't need much reason. Way I hear it. Anyway, thought you should know. You coming to the meeting? Got work to do." Sam left, and Silas returned to his forge, but his mind wasn't on the iron. A woman leading Apache warriors. It wasn't unheard of. Lozin rode with Victorio. After all, but something cold walked up his spine, a feeling he'd learned to trust in his scouting days. The meeting that night was held in the Baptist church, the only building big enough to hold half the town. Silas stood in the back, arms crossed, listening to Mayor Hutchins work the crowd into a lather. "Gentlemen, we've worked too hard to let savages threaten what we've built here," Hutchins declared from the pulpit. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the evening cool. "I propose we form a volunteer militia, hit them before they hit us." "Hear, hear," shouted Dale Morrison, no relation to the Lieutenant Morrison of old, though cut from the same cloth. Dale ran the largest cattle operation in the valley and had lost stock to Apache raids before. "I'll put up $100 for Apache scalps, man, woman, or child." The crowd murmured approval. Silas felt his jaw tighten. 15 years, and nothing had changed. The same fear, the same hate, the same blood logic that said the only good Apache was a dead one. What if they're here to trade? The voice belonged to Father Miguel, the Catholic priest who ministered to the Mexican families. Has anyone tried to speak with them? "Trade with what? Padre," Dale scoffed. Stolen cattle? Stolen lives? My brother was killed by Apache 5 years back. And how many Apache have we killed? Father Miguel countered. Perhaps they come seeking justice, not war. Justice? Mayor Hutchins laughed bitterly. The only justice they understand comes from the barrel of a gun. Silas had heard enough. He slipped out the back as the argument heated up. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. He walked to his shop, but instead of going inside, he saddled his horse, a gray gelding that had replaced the mare of his youth. He rode south, toward the old trails he remembered from his scouting days. If there were Apache nearby, they'd camp where they had water and good sight lines, where they could defend if needed, but also retreat. He knew of such a place, a box canyon with a spring that stayed good even in drought years. The moon was high when he smelled their fires. Silas dismounted, tied his horse, and approached on foot. He left his gun belt on the saddle horn. If they wanted him dead, iron wouldn't save him anyway. He was still 50 yards from their camp when a voice called out in accented English. "Stop there! White man!" Silas raised his hands. "I come in peace, to talk." Shadows moved, became shapes, became warriors with rifles trained on his chest. They were young, most of them, faces hard with purpose. One gestured with his rifle barrel for Silas to walk forward. The camp was larger than he'd expected, maybe 30 warriors, plus women and children. They watched him pass with eyes that held no fear, only watchful readiness. At the center of the camp, near the largest fire, a figure sat on a blanket, back straight as a lodgepole pine. She wore traditional dress, but modified for war, leather leggings beneath the skirt, a rifle across her lap. Her face was painted with red ochre in the old patterns, but it was her eyes that stopped Silas cold, sage green, just as he remembered, though now they belonged to a woman grown, not a frightened child. "Nah, Leah," he breathed. She studied him for a long moment, those remarkable eyes taking in every line the years had carved into his face. Then she spoke, her English much improved but still carrying the melody of her native tongue. "So, the man who bandaged my leg remembers my name. I remember everything." The words came out rougher than he intended. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Silas lowered himself to the ground across from her. Up close, he could see she was beautiful in the way a hawk is beautiful, fierce, untamed, perfect in her purpose. "Why do you come here?" "The town knows you're here. They're organizing a militia. They plan to attack. Let them come." Her voice was calm as deep water. "We are ready. It doesn't have to be this way." "No?" She leaned forward, and firelight danced across her painted face. "Tell me, Silas Kane, how should it be? Should we continue to watch as your people take our lands, poison our water, hunt our game until nothing remains? Should we smile as you build your towns on the bones of our ancestors? I'm not defending them, but bloodshed is the only language your people understand." She stood in one fluid motion, and Silas scrambled to follow. "Come, I will show you something." She led him to the edge of the camp where an old woman sat tending a young warrior. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, and his shoulder was wrapped in blood-stained bandages. "This is my cousin's son," "Nah," Leah said. "Shot 2 days ago by white men who wanted sport. He was gathering healing herbs for his pregnant wife, unarmed." She turned those green eyes on him again. "Where is the justice for him?" Silas had no answer. There was no justice, not for Apache in the territory of Arizona. The law was written by and for white men, and everyone knew it. "Why did you come back?" he asked finally. "After all these years?" "I have my reasons." She walked back toward the fire, and he followed. "You should go now. If you are seen here when the fighting starts, both sides will call you traitor." "What if there didn't have to be fighting? What if I could arrange a meeting, a real talk, with men who put prices on our scalps?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You have grown naive in your years of making horseshoes. Silas Kane, maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching people die for dirt and pride." She stopped walking, turned to face him fully. For a moment, Something softened in her expression, a glimpse of the child he'd known. Perhaps, or maybe just the woman seeing the man clearly. "You saved my life once. For that, I give you this warning. Tell any in town who will listen to stay away. We want only what was stolen from us. But if they come with guns—" She touched the rifle at her side. "We will not run, not this time. And if I can't convince them, then you should decide which side of the fight you wish to be on. The time for standing in the middle is past." She called out something in Apache, and 2 warriors appeared to escort him back to his horse. As he mounted, Silas looked back one more time. She stood by the fire, watching him. A figure from mythology given flesh, terrible and beautiful and utterly beyond his reach. He rode back to town through the dying night, his thoughts as tangled as mesquite roots. By dawn, the town would be arming. By tomorrow, maybe the day after, blood would flow, and caught between 2 worlds, just as he'd always been. Silas Kane would have to choose. The blacksmith shop was cold when he returned. He didn't bother lighting the forge. Instead, he sat in the dark, remembering a frightened girl with green eyes and wondering how that child had become this warrior, this force of nature that threatened to tear Redemption Creek apart. Outside, a rooster crowed the coming dawn. Soon the town would wake. Soon the fear would build. Soon the killing would start, unless someone found a way to stop it. Silas rose, stretched his tired back, and began to plan. He'd saved her once. Maybe, just maybe, he could save them all. But even as hope kindled in his chest, he knew the truth that every man who'd lived on the frontier learned: some storms couldn't be stopped. You could only choose whether to shelter or stand in the rain. The meeting was set for neutral ground, Skeleton Ridge, where the old Butterfield stage route crossed Apache Pass. Mayor Hutchins had agreed only after Silas threatened to telegraph the territorial governor about the town's plans for an illegal militia. It was a bluff. The nearest telegraph was 50 miles away, but Hutchins didn't know that. Now, as the sun climbed toward noon, 2 groups faced each other across 30 yards of dust and memory. On one side, Mayor Hutchins, Dale Morrison, Sheriff Tom Bradley, and a handful of town councilmen, all armed despite Silas's insistence on a peaceful parley. On the other, Nalia and 5 of her warriors, rifles held loose but ready. Silas stood in the middle, feeling like a man trying to hold apart 2 thunderclouds. "This is foolishness. Kane," Dale Morrison spat, "talking with savages like they were civilized folk." "Shut your mouth, Dale," Silas said quietly, "or I'll shut it for you." Nalia stepped forward, and every white man's hand twitched toward iron. She wore no war paint today, and Silas could see her face clear, the strong bones, the determined set of her jaw, those extraordinary eyes that seemed to see through a man's pretenses to his soul. "We come to speak of justice," she said, her English ringing clear in the desert air. 3 months ago, your people signed papers taking the Valley of the Weeping Waters, what you call Miller's Creek. This was sacred land, promised to us by treaty. "Treaties change," Mayor Hutchins said. "That's progress. Progress." Nalia tasted the word like something bitter. Is it progress when children starve because their hunting grounds are fenced? When old women die of thirst because cattle foul the streams? "Now see here," Dale started, but Sheriff Bradley cut him off. "What do you want?" The sheriff was a practical man, less given to rhetoric than the others. "Return the valley. Honor the original treaty. Stop selling weapons to the scalp hunters who prey on our people." Nah, Leah's voice remained steady, but Silas could see the tension in her shoulders. "Do this, and we will keep peace." "Impossible," Hutchins declared. "That land's been sold, settled. White families have built homes there. Built on stolen ground." "Stolen?" Dale's face flushed red. "We bought that land fair and square from the territorial government. Who stole it from us?" The arguments went in circles, each side retreating deeper into their positions. Silas watched Nalia, saw her hope for reason slowly dying. The younger warriors behind her were getting restless, especially one with a scarred face who kept fingering his rifle. Then Deputy Jake Colson arrived at a gallop, dust billowing behind him. Sheriff Bradley!" The deputy reined up hard. His horse lathered with sweat. "There's been a shooting at Murphy's trading post. Old Pete Murphy is dead, and his Apache woman, too." The silence that followed was like the pause between lightning and thunder. "Who did it?" Bradley asked, though his eyes were already on the Apache party. "Ben Tanner and his boys. They were drunk, started arguing about prices. The woman tried to protect Pete and—" Jake swallowed hard. "They shot her down like a dog. She was carrying a child. Sheriff, you could see she was with child." Silas felt the world tilt. He looked at Nalia, saw murder bloom in her eyes like a dark flower. "Justice," she said, the word sharp as an obsidian blade. "Where is your justice for this?" "Now hold on." Sheriff Bradley raised a hand. "I'll arrest Ben Tanner. He'll stand trial." "Trial?" The scarred warrior stepped forward. "Like the trial for the men who killed my brother, like the trial for those who burned our winter camp?" He said something harsh in Apache, and the other warriors raised their rifles. "Stand down," Bradley shouted, and his men drew their weapons. For a heartbeat, Silas stood between two walls of gun barrels, waiting for the spark that would set the world ablaze. Then Nalia spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a cavalry saber. "Enough!" She hadn't raised her rifle, hadn't moved, but her authority was absolute. The warriors lowered their weapons, though their eyes promised blood. "We go. This ain't over." Dale Morrison called after them. "You Apache start something, we'll finish it." Nalia turned in her saddle, looked directly at Silas. "You tried. White man, remember that I gave you the chance for peace." They rode away in a cloud of dust and prophecy, leaving the white men to their angry muttering. Silas watched them go, something cold and certain settling in his gut. The fuse was lit now. All that remained was to see how much powder it would find. That night, Silas couldn't stay in town. The saloons were full of talk of war, of teaching the Apache a lesson they'd never forget. He saddled his gray and rode out to think, letting muscle memory guide him to the old places. A box canyon here, a hidden spring there. Paths he'd ridden as a young man when the world seemed simpler. He was watering his horse at Willow Creek when he heard riders approaching. His hand found his colt, then relaxed as he recognized the lead horse, black as midnight, moving like liquid shadow. Leah dismounted at the creek's edge, 20 yards upstream. She was alone, which was either trust or foolishness, maybe both. "Following me?" Silas asked. "This was my creek before it was yours." She knelt to drink, cupping water in her hands. In the moonlight, with her face unpainted, she looked younger, vulnerable, almost, though Silas knew better than to mistake stillness for weakness. "I'm sorry about the woman at the trading post. She was my cousin." Leah's voice was steady, but he could hear the grief beneath. "Maria. She fell in love with the trader, left the tribe to be with him. I told her no good would come of loving a white man." The words hung between them like a challenge. Silas said nothing, just watched the water flow between the stones. "Why did you try?" she asked suddenly. "Today, why arrange the meeting when you knew it would fail?" "Maybe I hoped it wouldn't." Hope. She stood, walked closer. "A luxury for those who have not seen their children starve, their elders die unmourned. I've seen plenty of dying." "Yes." She studied him in the moonlight. "I think you have. It's in your eyes. Silas Kane, the weight of ghosts." They stood there, 2 feet apart, the creek singing between them. Silas was acutely aware of her nearness, the way the moon caught in her hair, the graceful strength in her movements. It had been 15 years since a woman had stirred anything in him besides polite indifference. Trust it to be this one. Impossible. Unreachable. Dangerous as a cougar in the dark. "Your people will attack," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. When?" She tilted her head, almost smiled. "You think I would tell you this? I think you might, because you know I'm not your enemy." "No," she agreed. "You are not my enemy, but you are not my friend either. You are—" She paused, searching for words. "You are the man who showed kindness to a frightened girl. Nothing more. Is that all?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Leah took another step closer, close enough that he could see the pulse in her throat. the rise and fall of her breath. What else would there be? Her voice was soft, dangerous. I don't know. Honest words, honestly spoken. I just know that when I saw you again, something I thought was dead woke up inside me. Foolish man. But there was something in her eyes now, a heat that matched his own. This is not a child's story where the princess falls in love with a kind stranger. I know what this is. Do you? She reached up, touched the scar on his jaw, a souvenir from a long-ago knife fight. This is the world ending. Silas Kane. Your world or mine, maybe both. This is blood and fire coming to Redemption Creek. Then why are you here, talking with me in the dark? For an answer, she kissed him. It was nothing like the tender kisses of his barely remembered youth. This was desperate, fierce, tasting of creek water and grief and tomorrow's violence. Her hands fisted in his shirt, and he pulled her against him, feeling the lean strength of her, the warrior's body beneath the woman's curves. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she stepped back quickly as if burned. That was goodbye, she said. Nah, Leah. No. She was already moving toward her horse. When next we meet, it will be in war. Remember that I warned you. Remember that we tried for peace. She mounted in one smooth motion, looked down at him one last time. Stay away from town tomorrow night. That is all the kindness I can give you. Then she was gone, hoofbeats fading into darkness, leaving Silas alone with the taste of her on his lips and the knowledge that by tomorrow night, everything would change. He stood there a long time, watching the creek flow inexorably toward its destination, carrying everything with it, leaves and twigs and dreams of peace, all headed for the same dark sea. When he finally rode back to town, the eastern sky was lightening. Somewhere in the desert, Apache warriors were preparing for battle. Somewhere in Redemption Creek, men were cleaning rifles and talking brave, and caught between them, a blacksmith who'd once saved a child now wondered if he could save anyone at all. The forge was cold when he entered his shop. Silas didn't light it. Instead, he sat in his chair and cleaned his guns. The Colt. .45 he'd carried for 20 years. The Winchester he'd hoped never to need again. Old habits, muscle memory, preparations for a war he didn't want but couldn't stop. Outside, a mockingbird began its morning song, running through its repertoire of stolen calls. Even the birds here were thieves. Silas thought, everyone stealing from everyone else, until there was nothing left but the taking. He thought of Leah's kiss, fierce and final as a thunderclap. Thought of her riding through the dark toward whatever plan her warriors had made. Thought of the good people of Redemption Creek, who weren't all good but weren't all bad either, sleeping in their beds with no idea what was coming. The sun rose full, painting the desert in shades of gold and blood, and Silas Kane sat in his cold forge, caught between two worlds, waiting for the storm to break. The night came in like a held breath, heavy with waiting. Silas had spent the day in his shop, turning away customers with excuses about a bad back, watching the street through his window as men hurried past with rifles and serious faces. Mayor Hutchins had called another meeting. The militia was forming. Ben Tanner was still free, drinking at the Broken Wheel, boasting about shooting that Apache witch who dared to stand between him and old Pete Murphy. Justice, Silas thought bitterly. In Redemption Creek, Justice wore a white face and carried a badge that looked the other way. As darkness fell, he made his decision. Leah had warned him to stay away from town, which meant the attack would come tonight. He couldn't stop it, but maybe he could minimize the bloodshed. He strapped on his guns and headed for the sheriff's office. Bradley was there with his deputies, checking weapons and looking grim. Tom, Silas said, pull your men back tonight, all of them. The sheriff looked up sharply. What do you know, Kane? I know that if you have men patrolling tonight, they're going to die, and their deaths will start a war that'll burn this whole valley. The Apache woman told you something. It wasn't a question. Bradley was too smart not to have noticed Silas's sympathies. You've been talking to them. I've been trying to prevent a massacre, on both sides. Bradley stood slowly, hand resting on his pistol. That sounds dangerously close to treason. Silas, it sounds like sense. How many Apache you think are out there? Tom? 30? 50? You know how they fight. In the dark, in their own territory. Your militia boys will be cut to pieces. Maybe, but we've got more men, more guns, and the army is 3 days away at best. By then, how many will be dead? Bradley studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed, suddenly looking older than his 40 years. What do you want me to do? Let them attack the town? They won't attack the whole town. They want Ben Tanner, maybe a few others who've wronged them. Give me Tanner, and maybe— You know I can't do that. Bradley's voice was tired but firm. Man's got a right to trial, whatever he's done. Then God help us all. Silas left the sheriff's office and walked through the quiet streets. Most folks had shuttered themselves inside, sensing trouble in the air like animals before a storm. He made his way to the edge of town, to the old Apache burial ground that the town fathers had turned into Boot Hill. Seemed fitting, somehow, even in death. The Apache had been pushed aside. He didn't have long to wait. They came like ghosts, flowing between the headstones and monuments, shadows with substance and deadly purpose. Silas sat on a grave marker, hands visible, weapons holstered. A figure materialized from the darkness. Running Wolf, the scarred warrior from the parley. You should not be here, white man. Probably not, but I am. Running Wolf studied him with eyes like black ice. She said you might come, said you were a fool. She's not wrong, is she? She leads from the south. We enter from 3 directions. Running Wolf's English was accented but clear. You cannot stop this. I know, but maybe I can help. The warrior's hand moved to his knife. Help? You would fight your own people. I'd prevent unnecessary killing. Your quarrel is with Ben Tanner and a few others, not with shopkeepers and their families. All whites are our enemy? No. Silas stood slowly, carefully. That's the thinking that's kept this war going for generations. There are good people here, just trying to live, same as your people. Running Wolf was silent for a moment. Then, she said you saved her once, that you showed mercy when others would have collected bounty. For that, I do not kill you now, but stay out of our way, or her debt to you means nothing. He melted back into the darkness, leaving Silas alone among the dead. Minutes later, the night exploded. It started at the Broken Wheel Saloon, fire arrows through the windows, smoke billowing out as men stumbled into the street. Ben Tanner came out shooting, drunk and mean, and went down with 3 arrows in his chest before he could reload. From there it spread. The hotel where Dale Morrison kept rooms, the land office where the deeds to stolen territory were filed. But Silas noticed what others might miss in the chaos. The Apache were selective. They passed by homes where families huddled, struck only at symbols of power and oppression. He moved through the smoke and confusion, trying to help where he could. He pulled Emma Watson and her 3 children from their burning store. The fire had spread from the land office next door. He stopped Jake Colson from shooting at shadows, probably saving the deputy's life. He watched Sheriff Bradley trying to organize resistance and failing. His men scattered and panicked. Then he saw her. Leah rode down Main Street like something from Revelation, her black horse dancing through the smoke, her rifle spitting fire at any who challenged her. Her face was painted for war, but he knew those eyes, would know them anywhere. Dale Morrison burst from the hotel, pistol in hand, drawing a bead on her back. Without thinking, Silas drew and fired, his bullet taking Morrison's gun hand off at the wrist. The rancher screamed, clutching the spurting stump, and Leah whirled at the sound. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the chaos. Then she was moving, flowing from her horse like water, and suddenly she was there, pressed against him in the shelter of an overturned wagon. Fool, she breathed, but her hand touched his face. I told you to stay away. Never was good at taking orders. Gunfire erupted nearby. The militia had finally organized, pouring fire at a group of warriors near the bank. Leah started to move, but Silas caught her arm. Don't, it's a crossfire. You'll be killed. My warriors, Know what they're doing? Look." The Apache had already vanished, leaving the militia shooting at empty air. But from the roof of the hardware store, rifle barrels appeared. The militia scattered, seeking cover. "This has to stop," Silas said urgently. "You've made your point. Tanner's dead. The land office is burning. End it now, before the army comes." "The army!" She laughed bitterly. "They always come, after we defend ourselves, never when we are the ones dying." An explosion rocked the night. Someone had gotten to the gun store's powder magazine. In the hellish light, Silas could see tears cutting tracks through her war paint. "How many of your people have you lost tonight?" he asked softly. 3, maybe more." The admission came hard. "But they died as warriors, not victims." "And if you stay? If you keep fighting? How many more?" She looked at him, and for a moment the warrior mask slipped, showing the woman beneath, tired, grieving, carrying the weight of her people's hopes and rage. "You care about this?" she asked. "Truly, I care about you." The words hung between them like a confession. Around them, Redemption Creek burned, but in their small shelter, time seemed to pause. "Foolish man," she said again, but softly this time. Then she kissed him, fierce and desperate, tasting of smoke and sorrow. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "In another world, perhaps." "In this world," he said firmly. "Right here, right now." She touched his face one more time, then stood. A shrill whistle cut through the night. The Apache signaled to withdraw. Warriors materialized from smoke and shadow, falling back in good order. "This is not over," she told him. "My people's grievances remain. But for tonight," she looked at the burning town, at the bodies in the street. "For tonight, enough blood has been spilled." She vaulted onto her horse with that liquid grace he'd come to know, looked down at him one last time. "What happens now?" he asked. Now we see if your people have learned anything, or if they will come for vengeance. If they come, we will be ready." "And us? You and me?" Her smile was sad as winter moonlight. "There is no you and me, Silas Kane. There is only this moment, already passing." She wheeled her horse and was gone, leading her warriors into the desert darkness. Silas stood in the street, watching them go, his lips still tasting of their impossible kiss. The fire brigade had finally organized, forming bucket lines, saving what they could. Sheriff Bradley found Silas near dawn, both men exhausted and covered in soot. "Morrison says you shot him," Bradley said without preamble. "He was about to shoot someone in the back." "An Apache someone." "A someone. That's all that matters." Bradley studied him for a long moment. "You know I should arrest you. You know you won't." The sheriff sighed. "No, I won't. Truth is, you probably kept this from being worse than it was. I saw you pulling folks from fires, stopping panic shooting." He paused. "Also saw you with her, the Apache woman." Silas said nothing. "War's coming. Silas, real war. The army won't let this stand, and when they come, they won't distinguish between raiders and peaceable Apache. It'll be Camp Grant all over again. Unless someone stops it. Who? You? You're just one man caught between two sides, trusted by neither." As the sun rose over the smoking ruins of Redemption Creek's dreams of easy prosperity, Silas knew the sheriff was right. He was just one man, but sometimes one man was all that stood between tragedy and catastrophe. He thought of Na Leah riding through the desert, proud and unbroken. Thought of the townspeople, even now beginning to bury their dead and rebuild their lives. Thought of the storm still gathering on the horizon. One man might not be enough, but it was a start. Dawn came to Redemption Creek like a reluctant witness, revealing the night's destruction in merciless detail. The Broken Wheel Saloon was a skeleton of charred timbers. The land office still smoldered, years of deeds and claims reduced to ash. 3 bodies lay in the street, covered with blankets, Ben Tanner and 2 of his drinking companions who'd been too drunk or too stupid to run. Silas worked through the morning, helping where he could. His hands, so used to shaping iron, now pulled debris from collapsed buildings and fashioned crutches for the wounded. No one thanked him. Word had spread about his shooting of Dale Morrison, about his meeting with the Apache woman in the smoke. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with something like understanding, but most just looked away. It was near noon when Father Miguel found him. "They have called a war council," the priest said quietly. "At the mayor's house. They plan to ride to Fort Buchanan, demand army intervention. That's 3 days' ride. A lot can happen in 3 days. See, this is what worries me." Father Miguel studied him with knowing eyes. "You will try to stop this. Someone has to. Be careful, my friend. There are those who already call you traitor. They would not weep to find you with a bullet in your back." Silas knew the priest was right, but knowledge and wisdom were different things, and he'd never been accused of an excess of the latter. The trail to the Apache camp was harder to follow in daylight. They'd moved since the attack. Of course, only a fool would stay in one place after tweaking the eagle's tail feathers. But Silas had learned tracking from the Apache themselves, back in his scouting days, and he knew their patterns. Water, high ground, multiple escape routes. He found them in Weeping Woman Canyon, 15 miles from town. The sentries let him pass, whether on Naalia's orders or out of curiosity. He couldn't say. The camp was subdued. Victory tempered by loss. He saw women keening over bodies wrapped for burial, children with eyes too old for their faces. Leah sat apart from the others, on a ledge overlooking the canyon. She didn't turn when he approached, but he saw her shoulders tense. "You should not have come. Seems you're always telling me where I shouldn't be." He sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "Your people are hurting. 4 dead, 2 more who may not survive their wounds." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the weight in it. Their names were Sunwalker, Little Crow, Joseph Morningstar, and Marry 2 Horses. Say their names? Silas Kane. They were not just Apache. They were people. Sunwalker, Little Crow, Joseph Morningstar, and Marry 2 Horses. He repeated, "I'm sorry." "Your sorrow changes nothing." "No, but maybe action can." She turned to him then, those green eyes hard as jade. "What action? Will you bring them back? Will you make the white men see us as human? The town is going to the army. They'll demand retribution. When the soldiers come, let them come." She stood abruptly, pacing the narrow ledge like a caged cougar. "We will fight. We will die. But we will die as warriors, not sheep. There's another way? Is there?" She whirled on him. "Tell me this other way, white man. Tell me how we can keep our lands, our traditions, our children's futures without fighting. Negotiate. From strength, you've shown you can hurt them. Now show you can be reasonable." "Reasonable," she laughed, but it was a sound like breaking glass. "Were they reasonable when they slaughtered the camp at Skeleton Canyon? Were they reasonable when they poisoned the water holes to kill our horses? No, but nothing." She moved closer, close enough that he could see the exhaustion beneath her warrior's facade. "You live between worlds. Silas Kane, you think this makes you wise, but it only makes you blind to the truth that there can be no peace between predator and prey. We're not animals. No? Then why do they hunt us for bounty? Why do they display our scalps like trophies?" He had no answer for that. Instead, he stood, caught her hands in his. She tensed but didn't pull away. "Come away with me," he said, the word surprising him as much as her. "Right now. We'll go to California, Oregon, somewhere they don't know us. Start fresh." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Hope, perhaps, or just the recognition of an impossible dream. Then she pulled her hands free. "And abandon my people. Let them face the army alone." She shook her head. "You saved a frightened child once, Silas, but that child is dead. I am Naalia, war chief of the Chokonin Apache. I cannot run from what I am." "Then let me help you fight. You would turn against your own kind. I'd stand for what's right." She studied him for a long moment, then reached up to touch his face. Her fingers were calloused from years of holding weapons. but gentle. You are a good man. Silas Cain, this is your curse. She leaned up, kissed him softly, so different from the desperate passion of the night before. In 3 nights, when the moon is dark, we will council at Singing Rock. You know the place? He nodded. Everyone knew Singing Rock, a natural amphitheater in the desert where the wind made strange music through the holes in the stone. Come then, speak for your people. If any will have you speak, I will listen. But come alone, and come prepared for hard truths. And if the army comes before then we will paint our faces for the last war. Her smile was sad and fierce. But perhaps your God will give us 3 days. Even your Christ had that before his resurrection. No? She left him on the ledge, returning to her people. Silas watched her go, then made his way back to his horse. The ride back to Redemption Creek seemed longer than the ride out, weighted with the knowledge of what was coming. He found the town in an uproar. Dale Morrison, his stump bandaged, was holding court outside the mayor's house, working the crowd into a lather. Apache lover shot me down like a dog. Him and that she-devil are probably laughing at us right now. Silas pushed through the crowd, ignoring the mutters and dark looks. Sheriff Bradley intercepted him before he could reach Morrison. Don't, the sheriff said quietly. Not here, not now. You'll only make it worse. Tom, you've got to stop this. If they bring the army, it's already done. Riders left an hour ago for Fort Buchanan. Bradley's face was grim. Best thing you can do now is make yourself scarce. Morrison's got half the town believing you're in league with the Apache. Maybe I am. Bradley studied him. You really care for her? The Apache woman. It wasn't a question, but Silas answered anyway. I do. Then you're a damn fool. This can only end one way, and you know it. Maybe, or maybe there's still a chance for something better. Hope. Bradley shook his head. More dangerous than any Apache warrior. Silas spent the next 2 days preparing. He cleaned and oiled his weapons, not for war, but because the ritual calmed his mind. He put his affairs in order, writing a letter to his sister in Missouri, telling her where to find the gold he'd saved. He worked in his forge, shaping horseshoes and nails, finding peace in the rhythm of hammer on anvil. On the 2nd night, Father Miguel came to him. I have been praying, the priest said, for wisdom, for peace, for you. Save your prayers for those who deserve them. Padre, perhaps I pray for myself as well, for the courage to do what you are doing. Miguel produced a bottle of wine from beneath his cassock. Communion wine. I thought perhaps we could share a drink, as friends. They sat in the darkness of the forge, passing the bottle between them. You know the story of Romeo and Juliet? Miguel asked. Shakespeare, a little. 2 houses, both alike in dignity. In fair Verona, where we lay our scene. The priest's voice was soft in the darkness. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. How's it end? Badly, but their love, doomed as it was, brought peace between the warring houses. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, it's supposed to remind you that love, real love, requires sacrifice. The question is whether the sacrifice means anything. The wine was gone. The priest rose, made the sign of the cross over Silas. Go with God, my friend. And if you cannot go with God, then at least go with hope. The next night, Silas rode out under a moonless sky towards Singing Rock and whatever waited there, behind him. Redemption Creek slept uneasily, waiting for the army, waiting for war, waiting for someone else to decide its fate. But Silas Cain was done waiting. Whatever came next, he would meet it head on, with open eyes and an open heart. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all he had. The desert swallowed him, and the stars watched. And somewhere ahead in the darkness, a warrior woman with sage green eyes waited to counsel for war or peace. Singing Rock rose from the desert floor like the ruins of some ancient temple, its wind-carved arches and natural acoustics creating an otherworldly atmosphere. As Silas approached, He could hear voices carried on the night breeze, Apache voices raised in debate. The council had already begun. He dismounted at the base of the formation, knowing better than to ride into their sacred space uninvited. Almost immediately, two warriors materialized from the shadows, Running Wolf and a younger man Silas didn't recognize. "You came," Running Wolf said. "She said you would, but I had doubts. Where there's life, there's hope." Hope. The warrior tested the word. "A luxury we cannot afford. Come, they wait." The natural amphitheater was lit by a central fire, around which sat 20 or more Apache. Naalia stood at the far end, addressing the council. She wore ceremonial dress, white doeskin decorated with intricate beadwork, her hair adorned with eagle feathers. She looked magnificent and untouchable, every inch the war chief. She paused when she saw him, something flickering in her eyes before she continued speaking in Apache. An old man near the fire, clearly an elder of significant standing, raised his hand. "The white man will speak," he said in accented English. "Let him tell us why we should not paint for war when the blue coats come." Silas moved to the circle's edge, feeling the weight of their eyes upon him. Hostile, curious, skeptical, but willing to listen. That was more than he dared hope for. "I am Silas Kane," he began. "Some of you may remember me from the old days, when I scouted for the army. I'm not proud of everything I did then, but I learned your ways, learned to respect your courage, your connection to this land." "Pretty words," someone muttered. "The white man's tongue is always smooth before the killing starts." "Yes," Silas agreed. "We've proven ourselves liars and treaty breakers. I won't stand here and defend the indefensible. But I will tell you this. War now means annihilation, not victory or defeat, but the end of the Apache as a people. We are warriors." A young brave leaped to his feet. "Better to die fighting than live as slaves." "Strong words," Silas said. "Brave words. But what of your children, your elders? What of the generations yet unborn? Will your courage keep them warm when winter comes to the reservation? Will your honor fill their bellies when the government food runs out?" The young warrior's face flushed, but the elder raised his hand for silence. "You speak of surrender," the old man said. "This is all the white man offers, surrender or death. I speak of survival, of adaptation. The world is changing, whether we like it or not. The question is how the Apache will meet that change. And what would you have us do?" Naalia's voice cut through the murmurs. "Bow our heads? Accept the scraps from your table? I would have you negotiate from strength. You've proven you can fight, can hurt them. Now use that fear to win concessions. Real concessions, water rights, hunting grounds, autonomous governance of your lands. The treaties," someone began, "are only as good as the men who sign them. Yes, but there are good men among my people, just as there are among yours. Father Miguel, Sheriff Bradley, others who see the injustice and want to make it right. Give them a chance to be heard." "Bradley?" Running Wolf spat. "He stands by while his people steal and murder. He's one man trying to keep order in a town full of frightened fools. But he's fair, and he listens. That's more than you'll get from the army." The debate continued. Voices raised in Apache and English, both. Some argued for war, others for negotiation, still others for retreating deeper into Mexico. Through it all, Naalia stood silent, her face unreadable. Finally, the elder called for quiet. "The war chief will speak." Naalia moved to the fire's edge, its light casting dancing shadows across her face. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of mountains. "I have led you in war. I have painted my face and taken scalps. I have seen our enemies fall before Apache courage." She paused, her eyes finding Silas across the fire. "But I have also seen our children starve. I have held dying elders who remember when the Apache roamed free from the Gila to the Rio Grande. I have watched our numbers dwindle with each passing season." The gathering was silent now, hanging on her words. This man, this white man, speaks truth in one thing. The world changes and we must change or perish. But change does not mean surrender. It means choosing our battles wisely. "You would trust them?" The young warrior from before couldn't contain himself. "After all they've done, I trust no one fully, but I would test their words with action. We will send a delegation to Redemption Creek, 3 of our wisest to speak with their leaders. If they prove false." She smiled, and it was a warrior's smile, sharp as obsidian. "Then we will fight as the Apache have always fought, to the last breath." The council continued for another hour, hammering out details. Who would go, what terms they would accept, what lines could not be crossed. Silas found himself oddly moved by their democracy. Every voice heard, every opinion weighed, so different from the top-down authority of white society. When it was done, the gathering began to disperse. Silas started to leave, but Running Wolf stopped him. "She would speak with you, alone." He found her standing at the rock's highest point, looking out over the desert. The ceremonial dress was gone, replaced by practical riding clothes, but she was no less striking. "You did well," she said without turning. "Better than I expected." "They listened. That's something." "Yes." She faced him then, and he saw exhaustion in her eyes. "Do you know what you've done? If this fails, when this fails, my people will blame me, the war chief who trusted white promises. It won't fail. Such certainty." She moved closer. "Tell me, Silas Kane, what drives you? Why risk everything for people who are not your own?" He thought about lying, about giving her noble words about justice and righteousness, but she deserved truth. "You," he said simply. "It started with saving a scared little girl, but somewhere along the way, it became about you, the woman you've become, the leader, the warrior. I look at you and I see," he paused, searching for words. "I see what I could never be, whole, purposeful, uncompromised. You see a fantasy." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I am as broken as anyone. The only difference is I cannot afford to show it. Show me." The words hung between them like a challenge. For a long moment, she stood frozen. Then something in her seemed to break, or perhaps just bend. She came to him, not with the desperate passion of before, but with a weariness that was somehow more intimate. "Hold me," she whispered. "Just for a moment. Let me pretend we are only a man and woman under the stars, with no peoples to save or betray." He wrapped his arms around her, feeling the tension in her body slowly ease. They stood that way for a long time, silent, while the desert wind sang through Singing Rock's ancient formations. "In another life," she murmured against his chest, "I would have been happy to be a blacksmith's wife, to raise children who knew only peace, to grow old watching sunsets from a cabin porch. We could still—" "No," she pulled back, but gently. "That dream belongs to other people. Our path is harder. Together. For now. Until duty calls us different ways." She touched his face, traced the lines that years and sun had etched there. "You should go. The delegation will come to town in 2 days. Your Sheriff Bradley should be prepared to guarantee their safety." "He will be." "And Silas?" She stepped back, the war chief's mask sliding back into place. "If this is betrayal, if your people prove false, I will personally put an arrow through your heart." "I know." "Good. Then we understand each other." He left her there, silhouetted against the stars, and rode back through the pre-dawn darkness. The town was still sleeping when he arrived, unaware that the next few days would determine whether Redemption Creek would be remembered for redemption or just another massacre in the long, bloody history of the frontier. Sheriff Bradley was already at his office, unable to sleep. He listened to Silas's report without interruption, then poured 2 shots of whiskey from his desk drawer. "You realize what you're asking? I guarantee safe passage for Apache leaders, and half the town will want my badge. The other half will want my head. It's the right thing, Tom. The right thing." Bradley laughed bitterly. "In my experience, the right thing and the possible thing rarely shake hands." He downed his whiskey. "But I'll do it." "God help me. I'll do it. Maybe it's time someone in this town stood for something besides fear and greed." 2 days. 2 days to prepare a town full of hatred and fresh grief to receive their enemies in peace. 2 days to prevent the hotheads from turning negotiation into assassination. 2 days to prove that change was possible, that the cycle of violence could be broken. Silas left the sheriff's office as dawn broke over Redemption Creek. He had work to do, bridges to build, fears to calm. It seemed impossible. But then, so had a 10-year-old Apache girl surviving alone in the frozen Dragoon Mountains. Sometimes impossible was just another word for necessary. He thought of Leah standing on Singing Rock, caught between two worlds just as he was. They were both fools, probably. But maybe, just maybe, they were the kind of fools the world needed. Time would tell. It always did. In the end. The Apache delegation arrived at noon under a white flag. 3 riders moving with deliberate dignity down Main Street. The elder from the council led them, flanked by Running Wolf and a woman whose gray-streaked hair marked her as a grandmother. A voice for the future generations. Sheriff Bradley met them at the town limits with a small escort, as promised. Silas watched from his forge as they passed. The streets were lined with townspeople, some curious, many hostile, all wary. He saw hands drift toward weapons, saw mothers pull children inside, saw fear and hatred war with curiosity on familiar faces. The meeting was held in the courthouse, the only neutral ground Bradley could secure. Mayor Hutchins sat at the head of the table, flanked by what remained of the town council. Dale Morrison was there too, his bandaged stump a constant reminder of the recent violence. Father Miguel had been included at Silas's insistence, and Silas himself stood against the back wall, present but not officially part of either delegation. "We come to speak of peace," the Apache elder began. His name was Joseph Sage Flower, a Christian name overlaying his Apache identity like an ill-fitting coat. "But first, we must speak of justice." "Justice?" Morrison's voice was sharp with pain and anger. "You want to talk about justice after burning half our town? We speak of justice for Maria Two Horses, shot while with child, for the families driven from Weeping Waters, for hunting grounds fenced and water poisoned." Sage Flower's dignity never wavered. "Your justice and ours see with different eyes." The arguments went round and round. Land rights, water access, the end of scalp bounties, compensation for damages on both sides. Through it all, Silas watched the faces, saw some softening, others hardening further. Then the door burst open. Jake Colson stumbled in, face flushed with hard riding. "Sheriff! The army! They're coming! Saw their dust not 5 miles out!" The room erupted. Morrison was on his feet, good hand pointing at the Apache delegation. "You knew. This was all a trick to keep us talking while your warriors prepared an ambush." "No trick," Sage Flower said, but his own confusion was evident. "We did not—" "Lying savage!" someone shouted from the doorway. Townspeople had begun pushing inside, the meeting's secrecy blown. Bradley tried to restore order, but the crowd was growing, anger feeding on itself. Someone threw a bottle that shattered against the wall near Running Wolf's head. The warrior's hand went to his knife, and a dozen guns cleared leather in response. "Stop!" Silas pushed forward, placing himself between the Apache and the mob. "Think!" If this was a trap, would they put their elder at risk? Would they come in good faith to be caught in the middle? "Good faith," Morrison laughed bitterly. "From Apache? From a woman who leads warriors like a man? They're all in it together, them and you. Cain!" The situation balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one twitchy trigger finger, and the courthouse would become a slaughterhouse. Silas could see Running Wolf calculating odds, see Sage Flower's sad acceptance of how this would end. Then another voice cut through the chaos, clear, commanding, and unexpected. Leah stood in the courthouse doorway, but not as they'd seen her before. No war paint, no weapons save for the knife at her belt. She wore a simple cotton dress, her hair bound back, looking for all the world like any of the Mexican women who worked the ranches. Except for those eyes, sage green and fierce as ever. "I'm here," she announced. "If blood must be spilled, let it be mine alone. My people came in peace. I offer myself as surety for their safe passage." The crowd fell silent, stunned by this apparition. Silas felt his heart constrict. She was placing herself in their power, gambling her life on whatever spark of honor might remain in Redemption Creek. "Nah, Leah, no!" He moved toward her, but she held up a hand. "This is not your choice. Silas Kane." She addressed Mayor Hutchins directly. "You lead these people. Will you honor the safe passage your sheriff promised, or will you add more blood to that already spilled?" Hutchins looked around the room, at the mob hungry for vengeance, at Father Miguel praying silently, at Sheriff Bradley standing firm beside his promise. The mayor was a politician, but in that moment, Silas saw him make a human choice. "The delegation may leave safely," Hutchins said heavily. "But you, woman, you stay. You'll answer for the attack on our town." "No!" Running Wolf surged forward, but Sage Flower caught his arm. "She has chosen," the elder said quietly. Then, to Nalia, "Are you certain, daughter?" "I am." She moved into the room, head high. "But I do not submit to chains or cages. I will remain of my own will, as surety for peace talks to continue. This is the Apache way. A leader stands for her people." The crowd parted reluctantly as the Apache delegation filed out. Running Wolf paused at the door, looking back at Nalia with something like anguish. She met his gaze steadily, and some silent communication passed between them. Then they were gone, leaving her surrounded by those who had every reason to hate her. "Lock her up," Morrison demanded. "She's admitted to leading the attack. That's murder and arson at the least." "She'll be held," Bradley said. "But she's my prisoner. Anyone wants to get to her goes through me." He looked around the room, hand resting on his pistol. "And I mean anyone." The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring. Some seemed satisfied that Apache blood might yet be spilled. Others looked troubled, perhaps seeing for the first time their enemy as a woman willing to sacrifice herself for peace. Silas followed as Bradley escorted Nalia to the jail. It was a small building, just 2 cells, one already occupied by a drunk sleeping it off. The sheriff gestured her into the empty cell, and she entered without protest. "This is wrong, Tom," Silas said. "She came under flag of truce. She came after leading an attack on the town," Bradley corrected. "By rights, half these folks want her hanged. This cell is the safest place for her right now." He looked at Nalia. "I'll guarantee your safety, ma'am, but I can't guarantee much else. I ask for nothing else." She sat on the narrow bunk with casual grace. "Only that the talks continue. My people need this peace." Bradley left them alone, whether from compassion or pragmatism. Silas couldn't say. He gripped the cell bars, searching for words. "Why?" he asked finally. "You know why." She moved to the bars, covered his hands with hers. "The army comes. If they find Apache leaders here, negotiating, with me as willing hostage, perhaps they will pause. Perhaps wisdom will have time to grow. And if they don't pause, if the town decides to hand you over for military justice, then I die." Her voice was matter of fact. "But my people will remember that I tried another way. Maybe someday. That memory will matter. I won't let them hurt you. You cannot stop the world from turning, Silas. You can only choose where to stand as it turns." The door opened. Father Miguel entered, carrying a basin of water and clean cloths. "I thought you might want to wash the trail dust away," the priest said gently. "And perhaps pray with me, if your spirit moves you." "I do not pray to your God, Padre." "Then I will pray for both of us. Sometimes faith must be carried by those who have it for those who need it." Silas left them, the priest and the warrior woman, finding what comfort they could in their different beliefs. Outside, the town buzzed like a disturbed hive. The army was coming. The Apache prisoner was here. The world was about to change, one way or another. He found Sheriff Bradley at his office, cleaning his rifles. "How long before the army arrives?" "Hour, maybe 2. Colonel Briggs is leading them. I know him from the war. He's hard but not bloodthirsty. If we can keep the peace until he gets here, maybe talk sense." Bradley shrugged. "It's a thin hope, but it's what we've got. I need to do something. Can't just wait. Then make yourself useful. Dale Morrison's riling folks up at the Broken Wheel. What's left of it. Maybe you can talk sense to the moderates before they join his lynch mob. Silas spent the next hour moving through town, talking to anyone who would listen. Some turned away. Others cursed him for a traitor. But a few, Emma Watson, whose children he'd saved from the fire, Sam Aldridge, who'd always been fair-minded, even Doc Holliday, who treated Apache and white alike, they listened. By the time the Army's dust cloud reached the edge of town, Silas had built a small coalition of voices for reason. It wasn't much against the tide of fear and hatred. But sometimes, not much was all that stood between civilization and savagery. The Army rode in like Judgment Day, 50 mounted soldiers, supply wagons, and at their head, Colonel James Briggs, sitting his horse like a man who'd been born in the saddle. His eyes were cold as winter steel, taking in the burned buildings, the armed civilians, the tension thick as smoke. "Sheriff Bradley," the colonel said without preamble. "Report." As Bradley outlined the situation, Silas watched the colonel's face. It gave away nothing, carved from the same stone as the desert mountains. But when Bradley mentioned the Apache woman in custody, something flickered in those cold eyes. "Take me to her." The jail was surrounded now, Morrison's mob on one side, Silas's coalition of reasonable folks on the other, Sheriff Bradley and his deputies in between. The colonel dismounted, handed his reins to an aide. "Clear these people out," he ordered. "This is military business now." "The hell it is!" Morrison pushed forward. "This is our town, our dead to avenge." The colonel turned, and his voice could have frozen fire. "Mister, you can disperse voluntarily, or my men can disperse you. Choose quickly." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to break up. Silas started to leave with the others, but the colonel's voice stopped him. "You're Kane, the one who arranged the peace talks." "I am." "Then you come too. Seems you're neck deep in this mess. Might as well see how it ends." Inside the jail, Leah stood at the bars, watching the colonel with those remarkable eyes. They studied each other, the warrior woman and the soldier, each measuring the other's steel. "You led the attack on this town?" Briggs asked. "I led my warriors in answer to unpunished murders." Her English was clear, precise. "I seek justice, not war. Justice." The colonel nearly smiled. "In my experience, ma'am, one person's justice is another's massacre. But I'll tell you what I told Cochise and Victorio and every other Apache leader I've faced. The war is over. Your people have lost. The only question now is how many more die before you accept it. And if we accept, what then? Slow death on the reservation instead of quick death in battle?" "Life," Briggs said simply. "Hard, yes, diminished. Certainly. But life, with the chance for your children to adapt to a changing world, that's more than most defeated peoples get. Generous words from the victor. Practical words from a soldier who's tired of burying men, white and Apache both." The colonel turned to Bradley. "Keep her secured. I'll telegraph Fort Buchanan for instructions. In the meantime, this town is under martial law. Any mob violence, any attempt at vigilante justice, and I'll hang the perpetrators myself." He strode out, leaving them in silence. Father Miguel, who'd been praying quietly in the corner, spoke first. "There is still hope. The colonel seems a reasonable man. Reasonable men have overseen some of history's greatest cruelties." Nalia observed, but Silas heard something else in her voice. Not defeat, but calculation. She was still fighting, just on a different battlefield. And despite everything, he felt a spark of hope. The game wasn't over. Not yet. A year had passed since the night Redemption Creek burned. The scars remained. Empty lots where buildings once stood. A memorial in the cemetery for those lost on both sides. But the town itself had begun to heal. The new land treaty, hammered out through months of negotiation, had established clear boundaries and water rights. It wasn't everything the Apache had wanted, nor everything the settlers had demanded. But it was enough. Enough to build on. Silas Kane stood in the doorway of his expanded forge, watching the morning traffic on Main Street. A freight wagon rolled past, loaded with goods bound for the Apache trading post at Weeping Waters, now officially recognized as Apache land. The driver, Jim Henderson, tipped his hat. A year ago, Henderson had been ready to ride with Morrison's vigilantes. Change came slow, but it came. "You going to stand there all day, or are you going to finish those hinges?" Sam Aldridge's voice broke his reverie. The shopkeeper had commissioned new shutters for his store. Decorative ironwork was becoming popular as the town grew more prosperous. "They'll be ready by noon," Silas promised. "Good. Mary wants everything perfect for the anniversary celebration." The anniversary. 1 year since Colonel Briggs had made his decision. The decision that changed everything. Instead of treating Na Leah as a criminal, he'd recognized her as a legitimate representative of her people. The telegrams had flown back and forth to Fort Buchanan, to the territorial capital, even to Washington. In the end, pragmatism had won. Better to negotiate with a leader who could enforce peace than to scatter the Apache and fight a dozen small wars for the next decade. Na Leah had spent 3 weeks in that cell while the negotiations played out. Silas had visited every day, bringing books, newspapers, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. They'd talked about everything except what lay between them. That was too large, too dangerous to name in a place with iron bars. When she'd finally walked free, it was as a recognized spokesperson for her band, with papers signed by the territorial governor himself. The look Morrison had given could have curdled milk, but he'd been thoroughly defanged by then. Colonel Briggs had made it clear that any violence against the peace process would be met with military justice. Now, a year later, Silas finished the decorative hinges and loaded them onto his wagon. But instead of heading to Aldridge's store, he found himself riding south, toward Weeping Waters. The Apache settlement was thriving. Traditional wickiups stood alongside more permanent structures. Children played in the dust while women worked at looms and cooking fires. Warriors still carried weapons, but they also tended crops in the fertile valley bottom. It was adaptation in action, not surrender, but survival evolving into something new. He found her at the council lodge, mediating a dispute between two families over horse ownership. She wore a combination of traditional dress and practical American clothing, a metaphor for her people's journey. When she saw him, something warm flickered in those sage-green eyes before she composed herself. "Silas Kane, what brings the blacksmith to our lands?" "Official business," he said, producing a letter from his jacket. "Invitation to the anniversary celebration. Mayor Hutchins specifically requested your presence." She took the letter, scanned it. "A year of peace. They wish to celebrate this. People need rituals to mark change. Otherwise, they forget why it mattered. And you, what do you need, Silas?" The question hung between them like it had so many times over the past year. They'd maintained careful boundaries, she as leader of her people, he as unofficial liaison between the communities. But beneath the formal interactions, something deeper flowed, patient as underground water. "Walk with me?" he asked. They strolled along the creek that gave the valley its name, past fields where Apache farmers experimented with new crops alongside traditional ones. The integration wasn't complete, might never be complete, but it was beginning. "Running Wolf thinks I'm a fool," she said suddenly. "Says I've traded our warrior spirit for empty promises." "Running Wolf's wrong. You've given your people a future, a different future than our ancestors imagined." "Different doesn't mean wrong." She stopped, turned to face him. "And us, Silas, what future do we have?" It was the first time in a year either had acknowledged what lay between them. Silas felt his heart accelerate. "I don't know, but I know that every day I wake up thinking of you. Every night I fall asleep the same way. If that's not love, I don't know what is. Love." She tasted the word. Such a simple sound for such a complicated thing. "My people need me to be strong, undivided. Your people still see me as the enemy who burned their town. Some do. Others see you as the woman who risked everything for peace. Perspectives change. Not fast enough." But she moved closer, reached up to touch his face. "I, too, Wake with thoughts of you. It is inconvenient. He laughed. Couldn't help it. That's one word for it. Come to the celebration, she said suddenly, not as the Apache representative, but as Na Leah. Let them see me as a woman, not just a symbol. And after, we continue as we have, building bridges one conversation at a time, until the world changes enough that a white blacksmith and an Apache woman can choose their own path without destroying everything they've worked to build. It wasn't a declaration of immediate happiness, but it was hope, real hope, not just desperate wishing. Silas took it and held it close. The anniversary celebration drew people from across the territory. Colonel Briggs returned, bringing news that the treaty had been upheld as a model for other negotiations. Father Miguel offered prayers in Spanish, English, and Apache. Sheriff Bradley, now sporting some gray in his mustache, kept order with a steady hand. When Na Leah arrived, wearing a dress that blended Apache artistry with American fashion, the crowd fell silent. Then Emma Watson stepped forward, her children in tow. "Ma'am," she said clearly, "I want to thank you for choosing peace when war would have been easier, for showing us a better way." One by one, others followed. Not everyone. Morrison and his diehards stayed away, but enough to show that change, while slow, was taking root. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Silas found himself standing with Na Leah at the edge of the celebration. Music drifted from the town square, a mixture of Mexican guitars, Apache drums, and American fiddles, cultural fusion in 4/4 time. "Dance with me," he asked. "Here, in front of everyone? Let them see. Let them know that peace isn't just words on paper. It's people choosing to step forward together." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. They moved into the square, and the crowd parted. Some watched with disapproval, others with curiosity, still others with something like hope. They danced, the white blacksmith and the Apache warrior, while the stars came out above Redemption Creek. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be more challenges, more prejudice to overcome, more bridges to build, but it was a beginning. As they turned in the firelight, Silas caught sight of Running Wolf at the crowd's edge. The warrior's scarred face was hard to read, but he gave the slightest nod before disappearing into the darkness. Acceptance, perhaps, or at least acknowledgement that the world had changed and they must change with it. "What are you thinking?" Na Leah asked, her voice soft in his ear. "That 15 years ago, I saved a frightened girl, and now that girl has saved us all. We saved each other," she corrected. "That's how the best stories go." The music played on. Apache drums matching heartbeats. American fiddles soaring like hope itself. And in the middle of it all, two people danced, proving that sometimes, against all odds, love could build bridges where hatred had burned them. Redemption Creek had found its redemption at last, not in forgetting the past, but in choosing a different future, together. As the celebration continued into the night, one thing was clear. The Old West was changing, and in that change, in the difficult, necessary work of building understanding between peoples, lay the seeds of something new, something better, something worth dancing for. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like Silas and Na Leah connected across cultures. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, redemption, and the untamed frontier. Share your thoughts. Did their love story touch your heart? The campfire's always burning here. Partners,